Hello, my name's Valissa Aplin. I'm a social worker with a background in psychology and social work. I've been working in child and adolescent mental health services in a clinical role for about 22 years now. Prior to that, I worked in child protection and out of home care. So, my main role is in the assessment and treatment of significant mental health issues, so moderate to severe mental health issues for the 12 to 17 age range, and working with young people and their families around these difficulties. For about 7 or 8 years, I've also been working with education and working in schools, primary schools, high schools, colleges, in trauma informed care and trauma informed education. So helping to support schools with young people who have a trauma background and or are presenting with serious mental health difficulties. So today's presentation is on mental health issues, serious mental health issues for young people and support in schools. So looking at what those issues are, what are the most common mental health issues, how they present for young people, what's the impact, and then also looking at what schools can do to support young people with these significant mental health difficulties, and also what they can do to support each other and themselves, because we know that working with and dealing with, teaching, supporting emotionally young people with mental health difficulties really takes an emotional toll on those of us working with them. So including and especially, I think, educators who are working with young people, teaching and seeing young people every day and managing a lot of the emotional and behavioural difficulties. So we'll get started with the presentation. Okay, so this presentation is a joint project between the Australian Child and Adolescent Trauma, Loss and Grief Network, ACATLAN, the ANU, Australian National University, and UNICEF. Thank you for bearing with me with the technology issues that may or may not occur here, and I hope you'll forgive me for that. So we'll get started. Basically, for this session, what we want to do is open up a conversation about mental health issues with young people. So obviously talking about mental health issues is important for everybody, but what we know about young people, and especially adolescents, is that they are the least likely to talk about how they're feeling, what they're feeling, how it's really impacting on them, and they're the least likely to get professional help. So educators are in a really, really key role because they have so much contact with young people, to be able to get a sense of how they're traveling with their mental health. And if they do have a significant mental health issue, to be able to support them in that at school, and to be able to link them in with professional support if they need that. To be able to do that, obviously, we need a pretty good understanding of what the key mental health issues are for young people, how they present, what we might see or not see, and what the impact is for them. And then looking at a framework for school-wide support. So we're looking at the psychological first aid framework and how you can use that, what the goals of that are, how you can apply that in practice in your school to be able to support young people with significant mental health issues. So the key mental health issues that present for young people in the 12 to 17 age group are depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, psychotic disorders. They would be the key issues, and of course self-harm and suicide, so suicide attempts as well as actual suicide. So under the category of mood disorders, we've got depression, and that could be mild to moderate depression or moderate to severe depression. And we've also got bipolar disorder as well, so bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder that can be diagnosed and treated in adolescence. The anxiety disorders usually comprise of generalized anxiety affecting young people sort of across the board, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as social anxiety can become a real problem for young people, and specific phobias. The psychotic disorders we're talking about, schizophrenia, that usually gets diagnosed more towards early adulthood. But certainly what we see in young people in this age group is first episode psychosis. And we know that the outcomes for young people who not only get diagnosed early, but treated for first episode psychosis have far, far better outcomes than if left untreated. Then we've got the eating disorders. So we've got eating disorder that's not otherwise specified, means that's there's a range of symptoms for young people presenting. And then we've got bulimia and anorexia, of course. Suicide is, has become, sadly, an increasing concern with young people. In fact, suicide is, has been a number of years, in the last 2 years, the research is showing the leading cause of death in young people. There are far more attempts at suicide and, of course, suicidal thoughts that occur for young people. And depression is probably one of the key causes of suicide and suicide attempts. It's shown to be, about 40% occurrence of people who attempt suicide having depression. So what are the most common mental health issues for young people? And how common are these issues? There's a lot of people talk about that we're seeing a lot more mental health issues in young people than we did in the past, and also being more serious. So the most common mental health issues for young people in the 12 to 17 age group across the world, and the statistics from the World Health Organization, it is depression. So depression occurs for about 1 in 10 young people. In Australia, we're actually seeing anxiety either equaling or actually becoming a more serious concern for young people. So depression and anxiety often go hand in hand. And, most of you will probably know that in terms of when there's a mood disorder, it really affects people, and in terms of their worries, their anxiety levels. And then when they get more anxious, obviously their mood deteriorates as well. So it can be not only a vicious cycle, but we call it comorbid disorder. So those depression and anxiety often present together. So we've certainly seen an increase in anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety disorders, social anxiety, for especially the 15 to 17-year-old, but also the younger adolescents and children as well. Suicide itself accounts for, as I said, is the leading cause of death. It accounts for about 40% of deaths in Australia. We know certainly that the rates for Indigenous young people are much, much higher. So we're looking at a third of deaths for Indigenous young people are by suicide. The LGBTQI community, certainly far higher rates of psychological distress, higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, and much higher rates of attempted suicide in that group as well. Eating disorders are certainly very prevalent as well, bulimia being more common than anorexia, and affecting girls certainly more than boys. And psychotic disorders, as I said, first episode psychosis is not that common, but it's certainly not rare. And when we're able to work with young people when they present with first first episode psychosis, we're far more able to get the support and the correct treatment that they really need. So we know that most mental health issues, the onset is by age 14. Most significant mental health issues will be evident for people by, about the age of 22, 23, especially psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. But most of the disorders we're talking about, the mood disorders, the anxiety disorders, will present by about the age of 14. So it's a really, really key time that young people get the personal and the professional intervention that they need. So how do mental health issues actually present in young people, and what's the impact? So often we may not know that young people are struggling with a really serious mental health issues. Often the contributing factors happen over a period of time, and we see a deterioration in their mood, a deterioration in their functioning over a period of time. And that's when we know that something is certainly out of what we call the norm in terms of adolescent issues. So they present certainly with a change of mood, and certainly in the mood disorders, depression, that's a key factor. It's not always, however, about sad mood. So for some young people, absolutely, sad mood is what happens for them. That's key. For a lot of young people, there's a change in their mood in terms of irritability and or anger or even aggression. So that goes then hand in hand with changes in things like their social interactions, relationships with their family and parents, withdrawal from social activities and things they're interested in, withdrawal from their those important social relationships, as well as a deterioration in things like sleep and eating patterns. So whether it's eating more or eating less, sleeping more or sleeping less, we see those changes. Also a change in either school attendance, engagement with school, and certainly a decline in grades. So sometimes it can be difficult to see in terms of a young person and what they're presenting with. And that's why it is really important, as we said, that we do have the conversations overall around mental health with young people and what is actual mental health, and how young people can be sort of supported with their mental health, and to support them in being able to really talk and connect with people when they really need that help when things are getting more serious. So the impact of mental health issues for young people can be short-term and or long-term. In the short term, we see things like we just talked about, those changes in functioning, those changes in emotional well-being, changes sometimes in physical well-being with sleeping and eating patterns, changes in mood. In the long term, if not treated, young people can really be affected. So what we see, what happens with school over time, it can lead absolutely to school withdrawal, school dropout, and we know that has really big implications for a continuation of people's mental health difficulties and also their futures in terms of job opportunities, etc. So there's also an impact on changes in the actual brain for young people if mental health issues go on for a period of time. So all in all, we're looking at getting in as early as we can, having the conversations around actual mental health and the sort of support that young people can receive. So how can you tell if it's a serious problem or just teen angst? I think that's a really big question that parents often ask, that educators ask, that other adults and helping professions ask. So there are so many changes, as you know, throughout adolescence. There's an enormous amount of physical change, hormonal change, and emotional change happening. We know it's a time of young people, really seeking independence, trying to work out, their problem-solving skills, decision making, struggling with relationships and working out, what sort of relationships work for them. And also the stuff that's going on internally for them, because, as they're separating more from parents, and they want to do more things on their own, they're still balancing that against really needing that support and, that security from either parents or, significant carers in their life. So with all those changes happening, teenagers can obviously, definitely have outbursts, anger outbursts, withdrawal, mood changes, sleeping changes at times, hormonal changes contribute to what's happening for them. So when we know it's a serious problem is if we're seeing a change in their mood, a change in their emotional state or well-being and behaviour for a period of time. As I said, depression to actually get diagnosed is only a matter of 2 weeks. For young people, we're seeing if if they've been withdrawing from friends, withdrawing from family, withdrawing from things they don't usually, that they usually enjoy. If there's if there's changes that go on for several weeks in terms of their sleep or eating, if you're seeing a change in their grades. So we're looking at functioning across the board. So functioning in all areas of their life. So really their own personal selves, their relationships with friends and family, their school, physical well-being, emotional well-being. So if you're seeing changes and deterioration in most of those areas, then you know that it's more likely to be a serious issue, more than just what is happening for most teenagers. So the big question is, how am I supposed to know what to do? I'm not a therapist. So what is really key here, and we're going to go through the components of psychological first aid, which will really address this this question. And I think a lot of people get stuck, educators I've worked with sometimes get stuck. They say, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a social worker. I don't have the training in that. I'm a teacher, I'm trying to teach, that's my job. We do know though that educators are really key in terms of the relationships, because they usually are the most significant adults in a young person's life outside their parents and or carers. So there are some really key things you can do, and we're going to go through those now in terms of this psychological first aid approach. What psychological first aid is that it's not debriefing. So it doesn't mean that you have to talk about all the issues pertaining to a young person's mental and emotional well-being and have to go through, everything that's happening to them. It's certainly not obtaining details of traumatic experiences they may have had and losses. You don't need to be able to, treat as such formally what's happening for them, or label or diagnose. Certainly not counselling, and it's definitely not something that only professionals can do. In fact, most often it's the personal relationships in a young person's life. So parents, carers, siblings, adults, friends, and then the professional relationships with adults such as teachers and educators that really make the difference for young people. The extra layer of professional support through psychological treatment, etc., can be very necessary, but it's these relationships we're talking about that can make all the difference. So the goals of psychological first aid, so these are the components that we're going to work through and talk through. So primarily the starting place always, should be safety and security, because really without the physical and emotional safety, a young person can't go on to achieve any of these other things we're talking about here. And, when we're talking about self-harm, which we know can be a really big problem for young people. We want to make sure that they're safe in terms of physically and emotionally hurting themselves before we address things. So that may be, of course, having to, remove objects for them, get them to a safe place if they're at school, and and looking at that in the first instance. Then we're wanting to create a sense of calm. We know in terms of the best support for young people can be how we react. So if we get really distressed and we burst into tears, or we get really elevated, or we get angry, or we get agitated, young people are going to feel much worse with that sort of reaction. So we're wanting to be as calm as we can. Now, that does not mean that we're ignoring or not dealing with the real impact it has on us and it has on you in terms of what you're dealing with. The important thing is that you're modeling to young people at the time, trying to create a sense of calm. Then it probably is going to be that you will need the support from your own colleagues, friends, families to deal with the impact on you. And that's the place for that after, we have the young person in a more settled space. The other big goal is obviously trying to reduce the distress. So we're not treating the mental illness. We're not trying to treat the, whether it's, a depressive episode, an anxiety episode, or any of the other mental health issues we're talking about. We're wanting to just reduce their psychological and emotional distress that they're feeling at the time. To identify and assist with current needs. So we were trying to really focus on the here and now. So it's not a time to be going into the past about any sort of either traumatic experiences or other things that have happened, or looking at, things that have gone on that might be really contributing to how they're feeling. We're trying to focus at the time on what are the current needs and the issues. Definitely then facilitating social support. Usually in schools, there'll be particular staff members, particular people, and/or friends as well that young people feel a connection with. And obviously at that time, it's important that they do connect with those people when they're able to. Establishing that connection is absolutely key. If the key people aren't available at the time when someone's having a mental health episode or really struggling, whether they're coming to you with suicidal thoughts, self-harming behaviours, or presenting with like a panic attack or a depressive episode, and you can't they can't have the person that might be their key support person, then you're able to do things in terms of establishing a connection just by being able to be present, to let them know that you're there, to let them know that you're there to support them. You're not trying to solve or sort out everything, you're just there with them at the time. So the psychological first aid approach really focuses on, it's a strengths-based approach. So we're helping to identify strengths and abilities to cope. We all have coping mechanisms and coping abilities. At times, we lose those, and we especially lose those in periods of stress, high stress, and when someone's having a significant mental health difficulty. We want to really foster the belief in the ability to cope, to remind people that they do have the ability to cope. You're not saying that everything's going to be okay, that everything's going to be solved. You're saying that, reminding them that they do have an inherent ability to be able to get through this. And just that provides that sense of emotional stability and support. We're obviously looking at promoting adaptive functioning, trying to remind young people at the time of whether, it's behaviours and emotional states that that are more helpful for them at the time. So, maladaptive functioning is when things obviously become quite difficult in terms of, sleeping patterns that that aren't helpful to what's happening for them, or relationship issues that are really getting in the way. So these goals are not the things that are going to happen straight away if there's a serious incident or issue, these are going to be the things over time that you'll be able to do. So you want to get people through the first period of intensity and uncertainty. That's the main thing. Help them to be able to recover sort of naturally. And then you're going to be looking at things like whether they need, screening and support for further specialised help, and then looking how to, promote their strengths, the things that really work for them, and help them to come up with some of those strategies. So coming back to these core principles of psychological first aid. So the key when it's needed, if there's any safety issues, that's always going to be the primary issue. Then we're looking at, creating a space and place of calm, increasing self-efficacy, increasing a sense of hope, increasing group efficacy, if that's helpful, promoting help-seeking behaviours, and all this in the context of connectedness. When young people feel connected to somebody that they're talking with or being with when they're having, significant mental health struggles, they're far more likely to not only share what's happening for them or how they're feeling, but they're far more willing to seek help, whether it's at that time or going forward. If they have a positive experience of feeling heard and feeling safe, they're far more likely to go on and get the help they need. So primarily we're looking at the promotion of safety. Down here we've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If some of you or about Maslow, he came up with a hierarchy of needs, saying that the basic need we need to address always is the physical and the physiological needs, having enough food, water, sleep, etc. Then we're looking at safety in terms of a sense of safety emotionally and physically. A sense of belonging is really, really key. And that's when, we find schools can be so important in terms of being able to create that. So there's usually people that young people feel safe with. And then there's spaces, like a lot of schools have worked hard to create safe spaces for young people who might need that regularly to deal with what's happening with their mental health, or they just might need, at certain times when things are becoming particularly difficult. So to promote safety, we really want to be able to remove the threat of harm. So if we are talking about self-harming behaviours, someone might be cutting themselves with something, we need to obviously remove that object from them. If someone is, hurting themselves in other ways, we might need to get them to a space. If there's, a safe space they can be in the school where they get a chance to kind of de-escalate and sort of regulate in terms of how they're feeling. So we want to help young people just achieve their basic needs. Sometimes what's needed right in the moment is, a glass of water, a cup of tea. Just those things help young people just to kind of bring down their levels of escalation, especially if they're having an anxiety episode, even a depressive episode or self-harming episode. The provision of physical and emotional comfort. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily just, hugging someone. That might be appropriate, of course. It's just around showing young people that you are there for them. So creating a physical space which is appealing, and also letting them know that you are there, that you're willing to listen if they want to talk, that you're willing to be there. We know sometimes right at the time that educators don't have the time to be able to provide what young people need in terms of that emotional input, and that is absolutely okay. Sometimes it might be getting somebody else who is available to do that. Sometimes it's about just providing that safety and connection at the time, and then going back to young people at a time where you are able to spend a little bit more time with them. It's really important that young people get repeated, simple, and accurate information. So you don't need to get into all the questioning about what's happening for them or what has happened to contribute to how they're feeling, um, or what's going on for them. You just want to give them accurate information, in terms of when they are in a safe space and place to be able to say, you know, think you're okay now, you're in a safe space. Um, you know, I'm here at the moment, or get somebody that you would like to be there with you, and just to answer questions that they've got, in just, simply and accurately. So it's just keeping things very, sort of, basic, not getting into all the background and the difficulties that, would have been leading up to what's happening for them. The sense of calm is really key. So we need to, stabilize things for young people who are overwhelmed or disoriented. And the best way that we can do that is to model that ourselves at the time. And that can be difficult, as I said, and we often need other support from people in our lives as well to deal with the impact on us. But if we can, create a sense of calm, then that's going to be, have a really, big impact on young people being able to feel that and know that things, are going to be, okay. So we want to, definitely be removed from the stressful situation. So if it's been a trigger of something, say there's been an argument or a fight between a young person, and one of their friends, obviously the first thing we want to do is to remove the young person from that situation. That may have triggered, mood deterioration, self-harming behavior, an anxiety episode. So we definitely want to get them to a safe space. So we really just want to let young people know that we are okay about hearing what they have to say. So simple things like, I'm here, I'm willing to talk if you want to talk, and if you don't feel like talking, then that's absolutely okay. Sometimes young people just need to sit and be in terms of what they're experiencing. It's often not a time right when they're in a crisis, especially, that they want to talk about what's happening for them. And we don't want to force them to talk. We know that doing that means they're far less likely, to get the support and help they need going forward. Just being able to sit with their feelings. It's really hard to sit with feelings of distress, in everyone, but young people particularly. It's very, very difficult for us to just be with how they're feeling. But we're not there to correct how they're feeling. We're not there to change and try and get them into a happy place or out of how they're feeling. We actually just want to acknowledge, if they're saying that they feel really, really bad at the moment, they feel really crappy, they feel really down, everything's been going badly for them, we can acknowledge that and just say, that just sounds really hard, what you're feeling at the moment. And, just acknowledge that what they're feeling is how they're feeling. And we don't have to be the ones to change that. And we don't want to be. We want to let them know that they're allowed to have the feelings that they're having. So in that, we're remembering there's no right or wrong way to feel. And it's really important to be compassionate, even if young people are being difficult. And we know that young people can be very, very difficult at times, very challenging. As much as possible, if we can be compassionate in that moment, that's what's going to help create that sense of calm for them. Connectedness is probably the most key thing. As I said, when young people feel connected to someone, they're far more likely to either share how they're feeling or just even sit with how they're feeling. And that can just make the whole difference in terms of what they're experiencing. So the connectedness comes about by the things we've talked about, creating a sense of safety, a sense of calm. Those things actually contribute to being connected to somebody. So just being able to say to a young person, um, I'm here at the moment, or linking them in with somebody that they might like to, whether it's other school staff, friends, family, is there somebody that I can get, that can be with you at the moment? Um, and letting them know that you are willing to be there. It can be very tricky when you're busy and you've got a lot going on. It doesn't mean you need to be there for a long time. In fact, it's dealing with, what's happening right in that moment. That's the most important. Reaching out and checking in regularly is really, really important. The act of reaching out makes a difference. Just checking in, asking young person, how are you feeling? What's been happening for you? Um, it can really lead to young people talking about how they're feeling or letting you know. And it shouldn't just be a once off. If we know that a young person's struggling with a particular mental health issue, we actually do need to check in regularly. So whether that is a daily check-in that we set up, in the morning, say coming in when we know things are particularly challenging for a young person, they come in and check in just to say, how are you going today? What do you need today? What can we do to help you get through the day? And that's, links in with just the listening and the being with. So just that ability to be able to listen. You don't necessarily even have to say anything. It's the listening that makes a difference if young people are wanting to talk. We know that empathy makes a real difference and not sympathy. So we're not feeling sorry for somebody in terms of what they're experiencing. Being able to show empathy is really important, to actually show that we understand in terms of that they are feeling, the way that they're feeling, in terms of we're not trying to solve it or fix it or make it better. And sometimes we just need to say, I don't know what to say right now. I'm just really glad that you told me, or I'm really glad that you're here with me at the moment. I'm not sure what to say. That's an empathic response. If we start with things like, well, if you did this or if you did that, or, you should have got more sleep, then you wouldn't feel like this, or you shouldn't have had that fight. Those sort of things obviously are not going to create that sense of connectedness. And what, we also obviously want to respect cultural norms, gender issues, things that, really impact on particular young people in their lives. If we do things that are, contradictory to, what is supportive for them culturally, that can have a negative impact. So together, all these things, we're just trying to create a relationship, and it may or may not be a longer term relationship. It may be short term relationship you're having with a young person, in terms of might not be the key support person or even the teacher of a young person, but it doesn't mean that we can't reach out and show young people that we are there for them and we're willing to be there. So self-efficacy is really important for young people. They're in a time of development where they're really trying to, work towards independence, get a sense of their own self and their self-worth and self-esteem, work out who they are, and there's a lot of difficulties and tricky things for them in that. But if we just do everything for them or tell them everything that we think they need to know, it often backfires. So we really want to engage them in meeting their own needs. So after we've done things in terms of addressing safety, creating a sense of calm, connecting with them, we really want to talk to them about, what do they need and what can they do to be able to meet their needs. So it's not about them having to solve their own problems. We're there alongside them. And, co-regulation is really important right throughout the lifespan, but certainly for children and young people, it is really key. It's not just about self-regulation and helping them to calm down themselves, helping them to get to a place where they do things on their own. We want to be able to support them to do that. but we also want them to be able to come up with some of their own ideas and be able to identify what they need. And that can be hard for them. We're not asking them to do anything big or, identify big goals in terms of what's happening. It's just looking at what do they need. And they might say things like, I need to get along with my parents better. I need to get more sleep. I need to stop drinking. I need to, get off screens and have more screen-free time. We're helping them, and supporting them to be able to identify that. So we really want to assist young people with their help-seeking behaviours so we can support them and help them. We also want to really gear them up to be able to get the help they need when they need it. They might be living with a mental health issue that's short term. They might be living with a mental health issue that's long term. So it might be one of the key things they're really going to need throughout their lives. So you can provide information on services that might be helpful, might be available. And that's why it's obviously helpful to have a resource list for young people and to be able to provide that to them at the time. Some of those are phone services. Some of them are online services, some of them are face-to-face. And again, it's not for them to be able to, they don't need to act on that straight away. It gives them some reassurance that there's a plan, that there's something going forward. And just, when they express fear or worry, we want to remind them that help and services are available. In some communities and areas where actually, some services, there's waiting lists sometimes that are quite long. There might not be the number of services we need, but there's quite a few national services. There's a lot of phone services. There's a lot of online support, and it's really important to be able to have those resources that we can give to young people. It might be practical help that they need at the time. And that's really important. We want to be sort of working with them and starting at a place that's meeting their needs. So, if they identified at the time they need something to eat, that's the time we'll get them something to eat. We want to make sure that their immediate needs are being addressed. So as well as resources and services, it's giving them information just on, stress, what stress is, how we can cope with stress, and some coping skills. And, it might be something they take away with them, they use later. There might be a couple of, ideas that you're able to share with them at the time. So hope is really important for young people with significant mental health issues. Sometimes they get really, really stuck in thinking that there is no hope. And that's a key factor in especially disorders like depression, of thinking there is no hope, that either life is hopeless or awful, or they're a failure, or both those things. So we can convey that sense of hope by, letting them know that most people, and we know that to be the case through research, most people recover from their mental health issues. Even those that live with ongoing mental health issues, when they've got the right support in place, they can manage much more how they feel, and in terms of what kind of support they need at different times. The hope can be promoted by just being there and willing to help, letting them know that you're there to help. And like I said, if you can't help at that time because you're going off to teach class, you've got something else you have to do, or somewhere you have to be, you can let them know that. Most young people are pretty okay in understanding that and say, as long as it's like, but I'll check in with you again. So you might say, I'll check in with you again next lesson in an hour, or after school, whenever it might be. Letting them know that the reality of the situation, but that you are willing to listen. Just normalizing how they feel and their experiences, letting them know that lots of young people have mental health difficulties. Coming back to what we said at the beginning, we know that 1 in 10 young people have a significant mental health issue or disorder. So, the feelings that are associated with that, we're letting young people know that, this affects a lot of young people. We're not saying it's normal in the sense that we don't want to do anything about it, because we absolutely do. And there's a range of things, obviously, we want to do. We're talking here about the things that you can do in the school environment, and to continue to check in and connect. Don't just let it be a one-off. And then get other people involved as well as needed, so that, there's a team of you that can either play different roles or be able to be there for young people at different times that they need. So what do staff need to be able to do to support young people with significant mental health difficulties? It is really, really key that you have support in terms of personal support. So they'll be your own personal connections in your own lives, your own partners, families, children, parents, etc. But in your work environment at school, identifying who your key support people are and really being explicit about that. So, identifying a couple of people that that you can talk to when things are affecting you. If you don't get that sense of safety and support yourselves, it gets very, very difficult to be able to support young people. And usually that's what we find. What happens for educators and people in the helping professions, you can get things like vicarious trauma, where you start to actually take on some of those experiences and feelings that young people are dealing with. So whether it's you start to feel either depressed yourself or anxious yourself, that can be normal as well. But there's things that we can do to mitigate against that. So we need our own connections. We really need to identify the personal connections and support, and the professional, in terms of who at school can you talk to. And that support's really important in terms of being able to talk about how you're actually feeling, what's the impact on you. It's not just about, and shouldn't be about, debriefing, downloading, talking about all the nitty-gritties of what's happened for a young person or what's happening. It's actually looking at what the emotional impact is on you, how it's affecting you, and what you need. And it might be when really serious things occur with young people, self-harming episodes, suicide attempts, that you do actually need time off work. More regularly, what's most helpful, as it is for young people, in terms of they need to stay engaged with school, the worst thing that can happen for them is to be absent from school or away for extended periods of time. It's the same thing with working with young people. It's building things into your workday. So taking 10 minutes when you need it, taking 5 minutes, having somebody else that you can call or hand over to if you need to, and building things in that that contribute to your own well-being. So those things are really different for all of us. Some people do need to talk more. Some people need to have time to themselves more. So we really need to work through ourselves what we need and what's going to be most helpful for us, so that we can back up each day and you can be there each day to support young people. The numbers we're talking about in terms of quantity, and then we're also talking about those young people who have ongoing and chronic serious mental health issues, and they might be seeking your support on an ongoing basis. So just before we finish up, really want to look at, and hopefully this is important for all of you to discuss after this, in terms of how would this approach actually work in your school environment. Every school's different in terms of the, obviously the leadership team, the leadership approach, behaviour management policies that are in place, what happens in terms of inclusion and exclusion for young people. So how would this approach actually work in your school? So spend some time now to this talking about, what do you need to be in place to support young people with mental health issues? What are the practical things that you can get in place? Sometimes little changes make all the difference. And also it's really important to look at what gets in the way, of offering this type of help. That is very, very important to talk about. And when you're able to talk about the barriers and able to, have a discussion about what gets in the way, there's usually some of those things that you can work through. None of this is easy. None of it is a quick fix. We're looking at things that are in place in the short term and the long term to support you in the jobs that you're doing, to be able to support young people with mental health difficulties. So thank you for listening to this presentation. We are available by email as well if there's some particular things that you'd like to talk about further, and hopefully you can have a discussion about how some of these things can work in your school environment, what the things that might be difficult to do, what are the things that you could get in place. Thank you. Thanks for your time.